so it worked out. Anyway, all right. So today what we're doing is we're kicking off a brand new series, and I titled it Progress and Potential, in part because there's something about us, most all of us in the room, that want progress, and most of us have recognized some version of potential in our hearts and our lives. But there's something about this. I think some of us experience this when we're young. There's a young part of us that feels insecure, and some of us has insecurities when we're young, and they kind of like, we either learn to mask it pretty quick, or we just kind of bask in it and we don't sort of learn to mask it. But most of those insecurities don't like fully and finally go away. In fact, most of them follow us to some degree throughout the course of our lives. And then some of us have built confidence in ourselves as we kind of move forward, and you've done extraordinary things. But one of the most fascinating things for me is I lived in Atlanta for a while, and I got to sit with some really high-level leaders. I mean, these guys were really, really great. And I'll never forget, I was sitting with one of them, and as we were sitting together, he was probably in his mid-50s. His net worth was at some point more than I could just count. Like, there were just so many zeros. I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. And in fact, I figured it up one day. It's kind of fun. He made more in the lunch, this is just to give you context, more in the lunch than I made that year at my intern job, which is kind of fun. And I remember talking to him about this, and he had such a fantastic leader, led in so many great ways. And I remember sitting there with him, and we were talking about it. And he just opened up about his own like insecurity and life and all this kind of stuff. And he said this to me, and it stuck with me. He's like, the insecurities that I had younger, they didn't like go away. In fact, many of them got bigger, but my approach to them just continued to change and morph and shift. And I thought about that a lot. I was in my early 20s at this time, and he said this, which is so good. He said, one of the keys for me, and this is part of what we're going to talk about today, was that there were a handful of people that intentionally saw in me what I didn't always see in myself and pushed me towards that. And most of us have some version of that. There are very few people that don't have somebody in your life that came alongside of you, and it could be as simple as this. They can say, hey, I think you might be good at this. Some version of like, I think you might be good at this. Some of you have people that have done that when it comes to sports. Like somebody looked at you and said, hey, I think you would be a good football player. And you're like, I don't know that I would. And then you did it, and you're like, man, I'm pretty angry, and I'm pretty good at this right now. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of that. Some of you, when it came to this, a teacher noticed something in you, and all of a sudden something sort of bubbled up. And there's this thing where most of us have experienced this. I put it in my notes this way. Have you ever had somebody believe in you, though, more than you believed in yourself? And this is different, right? Like, you believe in yourself for some things because you have natural confidence, because you've done some things good, but a coach believed in you more than you believed in you, and so you ended up doing more than you thought that you could do, right? Or a teacher did the same sort of thing, right? I talk to people all the time that they ended up in college. They were one of the first people in their family to go to college. And the reason that they were able to do that, the reason that they chose to do that, is because somewhere along the way, somebody said, hey, I see this in you, and I believe in you. There's a piece of that. My mom was really good at this. She did this with me, which I was really lucky to be in a family that focused on this. She would say all the time, she goes, hey, I see this thing in you, and I think you might be good at it. Even when I didn't see it myself. Now, I talk about this sometimes. I don't talk about it a ton, but so I was in speech therapy for like 11 years growing up through school. In fact, I still do speech therapy. And I was the kid, I'll never forget, where I was like, I kind of want to speak. Like, I would look at pastors like, that's kind of fun. The great thing about being a speaker, because I'm super introverted, is you talk and nobody else talks back. And so I just say whatever I want. Nobody else is going to really respond. Sometimes an amen, but that's rare. So anyway, there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that, And so I would say this. I would say, hey, there's a thing of me. I'd go like, hey, but I stuttered. I couldn't say my R's, and for years and years, sometimes it still comes out. And I'll never forget, though, somebody looked at me and was like, I see that thing in you. You should try it. And I was like, I don't know, 12, 13 years old the first time I gave that. And it was all because somebody saw something in me before I saw it in myself. Now, I put in my notes, I said it this way as well, that oftentimes people can see in us what we can't see in ourselves, but there's a piece of this that's really important, and that's this, that if they don't see it or if we don't acknowledge it, we kind of have this thing called unreached potential that's just in us, right? And one of the saddest things that I kind of see and experience with people is sometimes because of fear, sometimes because of insecurity, sometimes because of just not even knowing what step to take or that sort of thing. There's a piece of us that has unreached potential, and we get through our lives and we go, I just didn't reach for it. Like, it wasn't that you couldn't, it wasn't even that you didn't have the capacity to, even if you didn't feel like you currently had the capacity, you had this like unreached potential in you. And what's fascinating about the Old and the New Testament to me is that part of the narrative of the gospel and the stories that we see in Scripture is most of the key figures that you see throughout the Old and New Testament God saw something in these people who had extraordinary weakness, and then all of a sudden called something out of them that they were both most of the time unwilling to do in the moment, at the very least very or deeply insecure about. And it was almost like this idea that God was doing what a lot of people had done for you or done for me, where he was calling out something in people and then illuminating something that they had, right? It really is like this illumination of like this unseen greatness that some people had, is God would speak into these people, call them to respond to something that felt well beyond their grasp. And then once they did it, it was his power that sort of made a way for them to move forward, right? Now, one of the people that we're going to look at today, the person that we're going to look at today, is a guy named Gideon. And this is one of my favorite, most fascinating narratives in the Old Testament. I'll say this, if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, there's a couple of things that are going to feel weird about this. The first one is that it's around war and people groups and ancient Old Testament stuff, and there's a little bit of that. So I think you should know, like, some of this is descriptive of what's going on, but there's also a piece of this where God interacts with Gideon and calls something out of him. The other part about this that I think is fascinating is God does something through this group of people, this small group of people that's extraordinary, and he taps Gideon to be the guy to do it. Now, when we pick up in the story, what's going on is there's like this, essentially the entire narrative is around a battle for not just a people group, but like one person in particular being Gideon. And what you see is the battle is actually around his view of worth and his ability to represent God to a group of people and to do what God's calling him to do. And he's sort of listed as this hero in the Old Testament, but we don't find him in a place where you find heroes. I mean, it's a little bit like Peter Parker, Spider-Man. Like, he's kind of a high school kid without any web abilities, and he's just hanging out in his dorm. There's a little bit of that it feels like, but when you see this, you see something actually extraordinary transpire in him. Now, the area of the Bible we're going to look at is called Judges, and I want to give you a little bit more context to Judges, because Judges is one of those fascinating books that most people just gloss over. Judges is a lot about military and wars and ancient fighting and all this kind of stuff. In fact, the judges that are talked about aren't judges that are like figuring out the law for people. More so, these are military leaders. So a lot of this is just a list of the military leaders. And so many of you know the background, but this group of people have been in slavery for hundreds of years. Moses leads them out of slavery. This is the whole like staff, all of them go through, water. It's a great day. You know what I mean? They all get out of that. And then time goes by. They make their way into the promised land before, Moses dies or, along those lines. They make their way into the promised land. And there's one sort of command that God gives them. And this is fascinating if you love the text. It says, hey, don't make idols. Don't worship idols. Here's the thing. Don't with the idols. Just stop with the idols. Don't do it. Because look, God did this whole thing with a staff, and look, all you guys came out. You're not in slavery anymore. Don't forget, don't make idols. And so, of course, what they did is they made an idol. And that's what they did. And so they go, and eventually they make idols. All of this begins to happen. And what's unsettling about the text is that God had given protection to this group of people once they got into the promised land. And in a lot of ways, it seems like he removes the protection. And so they become invaded by a group called the Midianites. And when the protection is removed, that's where they end up. And so they're invaded. And you find this group of people sort of moving through like almost an invasion and a military enemy and all these sorts of things. And they do what people do when they're desperate, right? And here's what the text said. They do what people do when they're desperate. It said, Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. This is what you do when you're desperate. It's kind of like, hey, we know we should have made the idol, but we made the idol. But now we need you. So can you please show up? There's a little bit of this. And they cried out to the Lord for help. And so in Judges chapter 6, what we see is that the Lord then shows up. They turn their hearts back in some ways in desperation to God. And here's what it says. It says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak and that belonged to Joash, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat. Now, I love this. We'll talk about this in a second. Threshing wheat in a wine press to keep it from the Midianites, right? And when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he says this. He says, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Now, there's so many fun things about this, and I probably can't hit all of them, but here's what I want you to picture, right? The Midianites had invaded. They're impoverishing this group of people, so they're essentially stealing most of their resources. So you got Gideon, who is this mighty warrior who's essentially doing this. He's hiding in this sort of wine press area, and then what he's doing is when it's clear, he goes out and he'll do the threshing to get the seeds that he needs to out of the wheat. And then he brings it back, right? And he brings it back and he kind of goes back into hiding. And this is the mighty warrior, right? The mighty warrior is the guy that's hiding and sneaking out and doing his thing and then coming back in and hiding, right? Now, the original language here is Hebrew, and the words that were used around mighty warrior, the visuals of it, this is like a force of might. It's almost like F5 tornado force of might kind of thing. That when you encounter this thing, you know that you've encountered something, which is the complete opposite of some dude like sneaking out from a wine press and going, I'm in the wind, and going back in. Like, he's hiding. He's hiding. The other words around this are power and virtue, and everything seems opposite of what you find Gideon with. So the Lord shows up and says, look, you mighty warrior. And this is going to call him out. And Gideon's posture, this is part of the reason I love the Bible. Gideon's posture isn't one where he like rises to the Avengers and let's go, right? It's nothing like that. It is the most human, real response. In fact, I've felt and said some of these things out loud. What Gideon's response is this. He says, pardon me, my Lord, which at least he's respectful, right? Pardon me, my Lord. But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Like when I look around at my circumstances, look, if you're saying you're with us and you're calling me mighty warrior, you're about to call me out to do something, looking around, it doesn't feel like you're with us. And looking around at the current circumstances, it doesn't seem like you're involved. And looking around, this is the real kind of crux of it, I don't actually know if you are trustworthy anymore. You might have been trustworthy back then with the Moses and the staff and the woo, and then all it comes crashing down. You saved us, all that kind of stuff. Maybe then. But now I'm looking around going, I'm in a wine press and I'm sneaking out. I'm doing the thing that whatever people do with the wheat and the chaff and they bring it back and the seeds. And now I'm just hiding. And the reason I'm hiding is because you didn't show up. And so where are you? And then he goes on, he says it even further, and this is so much fun. He says, where are all the wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us in the hand of Midian, which is a very real emotion. And the very real emotion is this, that you experience doubt, and you experience doubt because of the current circumstances that are around you. That my present reality is evidence that God either doesn't exist or he isn't engaged, and either one of those things doesn't move me to see myself the way that it seems like you're calling me to see myself. It is one of my favorite and most real and honest responses to God that you see in the Old and the New Testament. He's going, look, I thought you were good, but I look around, it doesn't seem like you're good. And you're sitting here calling me mighty warrior, and I'm kind of shaking in my boots, walking in and out of the wine press because of what might happen. And there's all of these circumstances. It doesn't seem like you're here, and all I feel is doubt. Now, this happened thousands of years ago, but at the same time, this is the exact same response that most of us have at some point. There's some of you, when it comes to faith, you go like, there's a component of faith that goes, I believe and I muster it up, and that sort of thing. But then you look at your circumstances, and it feels like God's either not engaged or he's not existing, because if a good God could, then a good God should do all the things that I think a good God should do. And it doesn't seem like you're doing that. And then you're asking me or calling me out to do something on your behalf. Now, some of you have experienced this in the past and you moved through it. Some of you are experiencing like in the midst of it right now. That the bulk of your deconstruction or your doubt or your struggles with faith or your struggles with Jesus centers around your current or present circumstances. And I'll just tell you, that is a real, honest thing. Some of you in the room, we'll just go even further. Some of you in the room are leaders, and you've known you were a leader for a long time. But at some point along the way, your circumstances, it just felt like it broke you. And it broke you to a point where you look around and you go like, am I actually capable of doing what it is that I thought I could do at some point in my life? And you look around and you go, I don't know if it seems that way right now. And what you end up doing, right, is you both question God, but you question you. You look around at your present circumstances and you go, look, I don't know about all of your stuff, but I look at me in the fullness of my own brokenness and pain and struggle, and I go, I don't know about all of this. Now, God's response doesn't seem to be what I think I'd respond with in this moment. Here's what he says. I love the response in Judges chapter 6. It says, the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength that you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Now, I'll tell you why this is unsettling and super fun theologically, I think. God doesn't even address that part. He doesn't look at you and go, well, shoot, my bad. Like, he's not doing that. He's not, I'm sorry, you're right. I wish you weren't in and out of the wine press. He doesn't do that. He's not looking at him going, man, I see your insecurity. come here, give me a hug. There's none of that. You know what I mean? There's none of that. You know what he does? Is he just speaks to what is and what should be, and then speaks to what exists already in Gideon. This is what's fascinating about this. And there are other parts where you see God interacting in different ways, but what's fascinating about this one that I think is so interesting is God doesn't take the time to explain himself because he's God. And this is what's so hard. This is hard for me. I feel this all the time. God doesn't owe me an explanation for all of the things in the world. And this is what's hard is you go, but I want to, and then some guys that wear microphones like me and stand on stage to teach the Bible go, well, here's why it all is. When you're like, yeah, kind of. But then when there are really, really painful things, that's not enough. And the real, honest, true answer to this is that people don't always know. Now, you could talk theoretically, we could talk theologically around pain and suffering, which I love to do that. But at the end of the day, sometimes there's pain and suffering. Sometimes we bring it on ourselves through sin. Sometimes it's other people's sin, and it affects us. And we don't know why God didn't protect us from it, but he doesn't. Sometimes it's insecurity that you've carried since you were 5, 6, 7, 10 years old, and now you're like 54, 55, 53, or 36, or you're 41. And that stuff has just migrated with you, and you figured out how to manage it, but at some point along the way, you go, I didn't deserve that thing, and you know what? You probably didn't. And it exists. And God sometimes doesn't give an explanation for those things. And at the same time speaks to what is in Gideon, not because of what Gideon has done or what Gideon could have done on his own. God speaks to the strength that he put there. One of my favorite verses, my mom used to read me this when I was a kid. It's in Jeremiah. I think it's Jeremiah 1:5. It's like, before I formed you in the womb, I'll knit you together. This idea that before you ever even existed in other people's minds, specifically your parents, that God was knitting the pieces of you together the way that it should be. That strength in you that existed forever since you've been here, existed there because God knitted it in you. So Gideon responds to this. He says, look, again, pardon me, my Lord. Thanks so much, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family. So not only that, but I'm like the Detroit Lions here. You know what I mean? Like we're just not killing it. I think all my Detroit fans are in the next service. That'll be fun. We're not gonna make that joke then. Anyway, there's a little bit of that where you go like, hey, look, we're weak and I'm weak. I'm doubting you and I'm also doubting me. I'm doubting my own status and authority. There's all of these sorts of things. And essentially what God is continuing to respond with, which is so fascinating, is this. Look, you're stronger than you know, but you're not stronger than you know because of you. You're stronger than you know because I put it there, because I knit it that way. And the internal question for most people, right? No matter how successful you are, no matter what your, bank account looks like, or what status, you are, or where you live, or where you sit on some sort of org chart, the internal question is always going to be, do I believe that God can work in, around, and through me? And not in normal ways, but do I believe that God can abnormally work in, around, and through me? You have a lid to whatever you can accomplish on your own. But with God, God can do extraordinary things through people. And throughout, again, the Old and New Testament, what we find the vast majority of the time is God taking people who were either ordinary or even less than ordinary and doing extraordinary things to these people. And this is what he's doing with Gideon. He calls this guy out of the wine press, says, hey, you're a mighty warrior. Hey, there's strength in you, so that he put there. And then in Judges chapter 6, he says this, the Lord answers him, says, I will be with you, and you will strike down the Midianites together. And then they all did the Braveheart thing, and they got on their horses, they put the stuff on their face, and freedom. I don't know, like they did that, right? There's this piece where he's like, I'm going to go with you. And the principle around this, and again, some of you haven't taken the time or long enough to even get with God and say, what are you speaking to me in these things? The truth is that God calls us, and anytime God calls you to something, God is with you in it. And not because of the outcome that you think you're going to achieve. It's not even just because of that. Because of what he's doing in you and where he's leading you to. God calls you to it, and then he is with you through it. I put in my notes, I put this on a note card years and years and years ago. And this was for me, and then I started including it in messages, I think when we started our church. I put this, I said, the depths of our fear or insecurity pale in comparison to the depths of possibility when we partner with God. That whatever your lid is, whatever you view your lid is, all those kinds of, you might even be right. But it pales in comparison to the power and the empowerment that comes when we partner with the God of the universe. And so what he does is he calls Gideon out. He's like, you're going to go and you're going to defeat the Midianites. Which, yeah, we could, and yeah, we should, and here we go. And so he did what any military leader does. The first step, you go, like, let me go count up. How many people do we have on board? This is always fun. This is one of my favorite parts of the text. It makes it so fascinating. Let's count up how many we got. So we know they got about 135,000. And they counted up. And they're like, well, we've got about 32,000. So about 32,000 are come with us. And I'll just tell you, I'm not a military leader. But I know enough about math to go, that doesn't feel great. You know what I mean? Like the ratio is 4-1. Have you ever fought 4 people at one time? No, but that'd be cool. I kind of want some of y'all do it. Some of y'all you can take it. But like 4-1, I don't feel great about. You know what I mean? 4-1, I don't feel great about. And so, but here's the thing. There's a piece of this where you go, well, maybe, 32,000, we figure it out. Maybe we can be smarter than them and more efficient. And so the Lord responds to Gideon and says, look, you don't get it. You have too many men. You have too many men. I can't deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. I love this. I'm like, look, if this is me, I'm like, God, here's the thing. I'm trusting you less because it doesn't seem like you can do math. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of this where like, this is low-hanging fruit. And I grew up in South Carolina, so come on, like, if I can do this, let's go. There's a little bit of this where you go, 32,000 versus like 130-ish, like, God's like, no. Because if you do it with 32,000, you're going to look around and go, hey, we accomplished the thing. Or my own strength is what it was. And so then he commands them, and he says this. So announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remain. Now, I love this. This is not in Braveheart, right? This is when he gets up there and he goes, hey, if any of you are scared, you get to go home. It's like, thank you so much, man. I'm hungry. Y'all got it, though. I believe in you. Go team. That's every Lions fan, right? You know what I mean? There's a little bit of that. They all go home, like we're out. Not a few of them either. Like, let's look at these ratios. Again, you can do this math. 135,000. Now we're down to 10,000. 13 and a half. I don't know how you do the half. To 1. You know what I mean? Now, again, I don't fight 4 guys on my own. But like a whole football team, you know what I mean? Like, no, there's more. Even more than a whole football team, like, I'm not doing that. Now, just picture this. This is kind of fun. It's like, what is that, 11 or 12 guys? How many guys are on the field of football? 11, yeah. So add 2 more because, whatever. Sorry, I was going to make another Michigan joke, but I won't do that. All right, so, but you imagine, like, you're the one guy out there looking at the entire team going like, I think I got him. You know what I mean? Like maybe Joe Burrow feels that. I don't feel that. You guys like, sorry, that was too much. Yeah. But you're looking out going like, 1 to 13? No. And then it goes even further. This is one of my favorite parts of the text. I love this. It says, but the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. Sorry. That is so cool. Can you imagine God's like, look, it doesn't feel like you're doing the thing. Take him to the water and I'll figure it out. I was like, I'm not taking anybody to the water. I don't know what you're going to do, Take him to the water. I'll thin them out for you there. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. Now, again, it's so easy to read the text and just like not humanize it. So I want you to picture this. He gets 10,000 people and brings them to the water, right? And they're all at the water. And then it goes on, it says this. So Gideon takes him down there. And there the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. So God goes, look, go make them make a fool of themselves. And then the ones who do it in this way, those are your guys. Now, can you imagine? You take them down the water, and you're Gideon, and you just watch 10,000 people do something. It's like, John did this thing. Like, oh, John, please stop. John's out. And you just go, and you keep going, and you keep going. And here's what it whittles down to. You ready? 300 300. Let's put this up here. This is even more fun. 135,000 to 300. I'd be devastated. I don't know what kind of faith you have to have. I'm just sure I don't have that much, you know? And what you really feel, and this is what nobody talks about when they talk about this. If you feel like God let you down before, and then he takes away over and over and over again the security that you felt like you needed to do the thing that he wanted you to do, and he strips all that away, and you're left with what feels like next to nothing, like the deep theological response to that is like this, right? Like it's a little bit like, nah, bro, no. That's another good show. All right. 135,000 to 300. Or you picture it this way, 450 to 1, which is kind of like my graduating class. It's like you stand there and you look out in a gym. There's like an entire section of the gym. And it's 300 and the 130-ish thousand. And what they were left with, which is fascinating to me, is their only like lifeline was full dependence on God to do what only God could do. And so 300 soldiers with a clay jar, a trumpet, and a torch show up. They break the jar, reveal the light, blow this trumpet, and they yell, "For the Lord and for Gideon." That's what they yell. And the Midianites would have thought they were surrounded by 300,000 soldiers, by the way, that it worked out. The timing ended up being perfect. It was totally dark in the morning, and then they moved forward. Now, this is what's fascinating about the Old Testament. When you see these sorts of moments, and I'll just be really honest with you, some of you are like, I haven't seen God conquer an entire people group like that. So that feels like a lot. And some people get wrapped up in the war part of it. Some people get wrapped up in the violence part of it. Some people get wrapped up in the fact that it just feels like that's a lot and too much, and it can't happen that way. Or maybe you're right. But here's what you know, and here's what I know. Is there are times where people feel called to do something so significantly beyond themselves that you look on and you go, you don't have the capacity to do that thing. And you're right, and they don't. But there is something in them that is not from them, that empowers them to do the impossible with God. And what's hard about a room like this, and I'm 36 and living in Dublin and living in the United States, and what we experience and feel is most of us are pretty good humans. Most of us are relatively good at our jobs and successful at the things we do. And at some point along the way, you just stop asking, dreaming big, believing that God could use you to do something extraordinary. And this is what the power of this principle is in the Old Testament. This is what God did over and over again. It's what God, or Jesus does when he calls people to be his followers. He doesn't pick the smartest. In fact, he picked the people who got cast out of the thing and didn't make it through all the ways, right? And what's hard, I'll tell you what's hard for me, is when I give a message like this to our church or most of the people that I get to talk to, is you can move through the course of your life and have a good life, but never have the fullness of what God has called you to do. And there were dreams that he put in your mind and your heart years and years and years ago that you don't step out because of fear. And here's the real honest part. Some of you look around at your current circumstances and it feels like God has ripped away all of the security, or he's ripped away all the things that you felt like you would need to do the thing that he called you to do. And so you're just left with fear, and every part of your brain goes, and that's wisdom. And so you don't move forward, and you don't do the thing, and you don't step out, and you don't take the risk, and you don't start the company, or you don't start the business, or you don't do the family thing, or you don't go on the date, or you don't, you could fill in the blank with all sorts of stuff. And the problem with that is that for people here who are followers of Jesus, and this is just for the people who are followers of Jesus, what you're doing is looking at God going, I don't even know that I don't believe in you or your ability to get involved. I just don't know that you could do it through me. When long before you were ever here, God knitted those things in you. God knitted the things in you that you would find yourself distracted by while I was speaking. Can I just say that? I love telling people that. Like, if you ever found yourself, like, I'm daydreaming while you're talking, I'm like, follow the daydream, right? Yeah, if there's a part of you, like I used to do this all the time. I'd hear people speak, and then people would ask me, like, what do they speak about? I don't know. I was picturing me doing it. Yeah, I was preoccupied with that. I wouldn't say it out loud because it comes out real not great. But there's a little bit of like, that's where I was thinking, you know? Some of you hear other people talk about the businesses they start. You just feel mad. And you project it on them, but you're mad at you. You're mad at you because there's a part of you that goes like, I know that's what I should be doing. Some of you in the room are artists who are pretending to be Excel people. And you're just not. And you figured out how to do it, but you're an artist. I talked to a guy the other day and his whole job, and I love this. He takes data and he takes all the data for their company, a large company, and then he puts it together and then he sends it off, which is so good. He's so good at it. And then in his free time, and I love this, he goes, I work really hard to get done with that so I can take the same principles there and he builds these like specific art forms on the side. He has a separate account. He sells it under a different name. And he makes this weird, it's really cool, weird kind of website things that are artistic and create movement, but it's all done on Excel on the back end. So he creates art from Excel on the back end and then he puts it out there and he sells it like, I don't even know what that means, but that is so cool. You know what I mean? And you know what he does? And I love this. He creates a whole community around this online. I love it. And there's something about him that goes like, I'm doing this, but at the same time, I also know that I am wired to create here. All right, some of you are going like, I got kids, I don't know how I could do that. And you don't have an answer for the how. And that's a little bit irrelevant to the first step, which is to follow Jesus into whatever it is he's calling you to do. If you're here and you're in your 20s, there's a part of you, every part of culture, and because we're systematized this way, every part of culture is going to tell you, this is the way to do it safely and make sure you're, and at the same time, there's a nagging voice in the back of your head that says, but there's this way over here. And it's not that it's unwise, but it's like, there's this way over here that I'm just like, I am drawn to do and build and create something. I'm just going to tell you, you got to at least knock on those doors and experiment with those things. Some of you are here, to be really honest. The thing that holds you back is your current level of security. That you fast forward, you're like, I got this many years until I retire. I got this many more things to do, and then I can be done with the thing. And I'm like, you can do all of that, and maybe you should. Only to the point where you go, but that's not what I'm called to do. And at some point you go, if I'm called to do it, then I have to trust that God will be involved in it. I'm going to follow him to whatever it is. I've watched people empty bank accounts. I've watched people take extraordinary steps of faith. I've watched people shake the entire time they do it and take the steps of faith. I've watched people make the world better because they just decided to move forward with the fear that they have. I've watched people build extraordinary things in the midst of their fear because they simply trusted God. So here's a question for you. And this is like an honest one. And most of us have an answer this quick. The question is like, what task has God called you to that if he doesn't show up, you're in trouble? What is it? What's the thing that God said, hey, I wired you, I knit you for this thing, and then you take this step out and you go do it. And here's the honest answer. If he doesn't show up, you know that you're in trouble. There's a number connected to the troubledness. There is a anxiety that's connected to the trouble. Like you know that you're in trouble if he doesn't show up. And then the second one is this. What excuses are keeping you from taking a step out into whatever that wine press is? I love that Gideon is hiding in a wine press when God calls him out and says, hey, come, mighty warrior, go do this thing. What excuses are keeping you in whatever your wine press is? What is it? Most of us have a really good one, and it can be a good one. It could be a really good one. Let it be great. Acknowledge that it's great, and then just acknowledge that it's also an excuse. Acknowledge that it's your own insecurity or fear or current comfort level or something. Acknowledge what it is and then go, okay, I've acknowledged it. And I'll do this all the time. People think I'm probably a little bit neurotic. I'm probably a little bit neurotic, but I will do this a lot. I will write down specific fears. And what most people do is like then figure it out and then just go blaze a trail. I don't do that. I usually write them down. I'll put them on a note card and I'll look at it. I want to stare it in the face. And at some point along the way, you have to decide, I have to decide, is the thing that's welling up in me more than whatever that thing is? And there are days where it's not. There have been months that it hasn't been. we don't talk about this part of the church plant very often. I sat on a porch for almost a year and a half, and it wasn't the right time yet, but I sit there and I had a note card, and it had a financial number on it. And I put the people who had our health insurance on it, because that was fun, just to be very clear that was likely not going to be where we had health insurance next, you know what I mean? That's really, I put kids, all the fears, all the play, I put all these kind of things, and I would stare at this note card in a journal almost every day. And I'll just tell you, there's a piece of you there, that's not even a bad thing, but you have to know what it is to know what you're stepping beyond in faith. And for some of you, it's time that you just put on a note card, like, here's what the thing is. I don't know if I'm enough. And then answer the question, you might not be. And then, is God calling you to do it? And will you trust him in the steps? Again, the depths of our insecurity and fear pale in comparison to the depths of possibility when we partner with God. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tweak it just a smidge, Josh. I'm sorry. I do this to you every week. Josh, Josh does all of our music, and then usually at the end of our service, I'm like, hey, here's what we're going to do, and then I don't, which is great. So it's kind of fun. I'll tell you what we're going to do today. I'm going to ask you to do. In a second, I'm going to end the talk, and then I want to talk to you for a second just for our church, just for a minute. So we're going to do that just for a second. I'm going to ask you to stay. It'll be like 2 minutes. It won't be very long. We're going to do that after I end. But I want to land this first before we do that. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Some of you in the room, you have a clear picture of what the thing is that God has put in you. And it's okay if you don't, but some of you do, right? And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do for just a second. I'm going to ask everybody, if you would, just close your eyes for a second. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads just for a second. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. If you are not living in what you feel like God has called you to do, right? Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I want you just in your head to acknowledge what that thing might be. What's the thing that nags you? What's the thing that you find yourself daydreaming about? What's the thing that you go, I just don't know, but I think about this all the time? What's that thing for you? What is it? And then I'm going to ask you just for a second, and we're going to have you do this exercise. I would love for you to do this for the next week, but I want you just for a second to go, okay, what's the thing? What's my excuse? Probably feels like too blunt of a word for you, and that's okay. But what's the thing that holds you back? What's that thing that holds you back from actually doing it? Now, what I'm going to do is, with your head bowed and eyes closed, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pray for you for a second. And what I'm going to pray is real simple. I'm going to pray that it nags you and that it bothers you and that it wakes you up sometimes. And then I'm going to pray that whatever that excuse is that you have is just very apparent and that you choose at some point along the way to take a step beyond it. So, Father, we thank you that you wired us to have the capacity to see these things. God, that many of us in the room, we have felt what you were drawing us to. For whatever reason, we've stepped back from it, or we've played it safe, or whatever that is. And so, Father, I pray that today, at the bare minimum, would be a disruption. If the person who's here that wasn't even planning on being here, and then they're here, and maybe they say, hey, like, this is a moment that you were speaking to them. God, I pray that they would feel disrupted by whatever the normal thing is. And Father, I ask that you would bother them with whatever it is that you're calling them to do. That they would not feel contentment until they move in your perfect will for their life. God, I pray that you would both give them the courage and the faith to stare in the eyes the things that they're afraid of, the insecurities that they feel, or the excuses they currently have to stay where they are. And God, I pray that they would look it in the eyes for as long as they do, but at some point that they would take a step beyond it and trust you in what it is that you're calling them to. And God, I pray that when that happens, that our church, we see these pockets of people who are making the kind of unique difference that you call them to make. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now, I'm going to do